Good evening, people of St. Elizabeth. Father Daniel here from College Court Apartment Studios in Austin, Texas. Our media department has been hard at work creating this Dolby surround sound update and Bible study. So that's basically what I've got for us tonight. Two things. One, some updates on stuff, and then two, I want to finish with a few minutes of Bible study on the gospel passage that we read this past Sunday. So first, some updates. One, Lucy and I, we're doing well. We are sheltering in place, which is what's sort of mandated for the Austin area where we live. It sounds like San Antonio is under a similar shelter-in-place thing, and there may be other areas of our diocese in our own neighborhoods that are moving that way as well. Excuse me. I've talked to a lot of folks over the past couple of weeks. I have not talked to everybody. I apologize for that, but I have talked to a lot of folks. One of the things that gives me hope is that everybody I've talked to is doing pretty well. People are a little stir crazy. Kids are going a little nuts. Some folks are struggling with loneliness, but nothing out of the ordinary for what we could expect right now. So that's a good thing. The other thing is that again and again and again, people have offered to me, hey, if we can be helpful to anybody, let us know. Thank you for your offer. Thank you for your continued material and emotional support of each other as church, as the body of Christ. And if you have offered to help others, as I continue to call around and be in touch with folks, if I hear of needs that I think we can meet, I'll reach out to you and put folks in touch as needed. I hope y'all will continue to reach out to each other just to check in, say hi. We emailed a directory this weekend, so everybody should have some contact info for each other. A few other updates. We are going to continue this Sunday with worship via YouTube or Facebook online. A couple things that you can do to get ready for that. One, again, if you have birthdays, anniversaries, or prayer requests, I hope you will email those to Wanda. She's curating a list, and if you could do that by Saturday at noon, that'd be good, because I tend to start putting video stuff together on Saturday afternoon. Another thing is that I was talking to a member of our congregation, and they one of the kids in their household has sort of been serving as kind of an acolyte, and so they have a little table that they set up when it's about time for worship, and they have a candle there. So if that's something that your household wants to do, prepare like a sort of a little makeshift altar with a candle on it that somebody can light as part of our preparing for worship. That's a wonderful idea, and it's a creative one, and I commend it to you. One other thing for worship this Sunday is I'm going to try, if you've got kids in the household in particular, or parents, if you're a coloring type, just some paper, crayons. I'm going to have the kids color a particular kind of picture as part of the prayers this Sunday. So yeah, I need some paper and colors if you're so moved. Finally, not finally, actually, penultimately, the next to final. Sorry. The people have asked me about what worship's going to be like, and particularly Holy Week. Just as a reminder, we have officially suspended in-person worship and gatherings through March. So that's this Sunday. I have not made an official decision yet about what April is going to look like, including Holy Week. A couple reasons for that. One is Bishop Reed may do some more communication for the diocese, and I don't want to. Everybody's getting lots of info about lots of different things, so I don't want to say one thing and then y'all have to adapt again with Bishop Reed is to say something. You can expect to hear from me about April worship about a week from today or so. I think we should prepare to continue being dispersed like this for a few more weeks. Austin, for example, is under a shelter-in-place order until the Monday after Easter. And I think that that's probably going to become more common. So no official word yet, but you can expect to get that from me next week sometime. One other reminder is that even though we are all sheltering in place and quarantined or socially distant, whatever you want to call it, right now, this too shall pass. This is temporary. And one thing that I want to remind you of is that all of West Texas, the Diocese of West Texas's camp and conference center schedules for this summer As of now, everything is still scheduled. If you're curious about what that might mean, you can go to this website, dwtx.org/departments/camps. And there's all kinds of wonderful things going on for families, for kids, for adults. I'm going to be leading, or chaplaining, not leading, chaplaining, the advanced backpacking trip for high schoolers and college students. That's in July. And what advanced backpacking means is just that none of us who are going, it'll be nobody's first time backpacking. You need to have backpacked at least once before. I've only been one other time. So I commend that to you as well. If you're going stir crazy, start dreaming about Camp Capers or Mustang Island or Colorado, Duncan Park. So I commend this to you so you can keep in touch with what's going on. Okay, that's all of my updates. What I want to do for the next few minutes is do just a few minutes of Bible study on the gospel passage that we had this past Sunday. So if you want to go get your Bible, hit pause on the video right now and then come on back. What I want to do is I got all kinds of high-tech equipment here. As I want to focus on one little part of this gospel passage that we had this past Sunday, which was John 9, 1 through 41, I believe. And the verse I want to focus on is a piece of John 9, 22. These other two verses, which we did not read, they're also important because the phrase I want to focus on appears here as well. So John 9:22. Now, a refresher on what this story is that Jesus meets a man who was born blind and gives him back his sight. So this man receives sight again for the first time. And this miracle, this sign that Jesus does, it happens on the Sabbath, and this causes a divide within the community. There are some folks who are saying, well, if Jesus weren't from God, there's no way he could have done this. So clearly, this is a special person in front of us. And there are other folks who are saying, well, Jesus did this on the Sabbath. He doesn't observe the Sabbath. Therefore, he can't possibly be sent from God. He must be a sinner. As this conflict continues, one of the things that happens is some of the religious leaders, they go and get the parents of the man who was born blind, and they want to know what they have to say about this whole thing. Now, the man's parents, they can tell that this is a tense situation, and so they sort of distance themselves from the whole thing. They say, you know what, our son's of age, he can speak for himself. Don't bring us into this. And then in verse 22, this is what we read. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Now that phrase, would be put out of the synagogue, that's the thing that I want to focus on. The reason I want to focus on that is because that phrase, would be put out of the synagogue, in Greek it's just one word, and it only happens in these three verses in the New Testament. All three uses of that particular unique word in the New Testament, they're all in John, and this is where they happen. I don't know if y'all can hear Zuby right now. He's drinking deeply of the living water of his water bowl. Hopefully this will be over soon. Anyway, and just so you can wow your friends at your next cocktail party, this is what the word would be put out of the synagogue. It looks like this in Greek, aposunagogos. This is a very bad sort of phonetic spelling. I know y'all were really curious to know what this word looked like in Greek, but hey, we've all got time on our hands, right? Now, because this word is unique, it invites us to explore further. Now, I want to do a little bit of an experiment, and I want us to pretend that we are historians from the future. Whoa! So imagine that it's the year 4000 or something, and all of us, we are like biblical archaeologists, church archaeologists, and we're trying to figure out what was church like for people in Texas, say, in the early 21st century. What was that like? And so let's say we're doing our research and we get together some letters from all these different church communities, and we're reading these letters, doing our good investigations, And let's say that all these letters, they are describing to a newcomer or a family member or something, what you would see if you came to this particular church on a Sunday morning. What might you see if you came to this particular church on a Sunday morning? And so I've invented some churches. So let's say that we find a letter from a church called St. Michael's, and in this letter we learn that at that church you would see on a Sunday morning you would see an altar and a choir and a bell tower. Maybe they have a really beautiful bell tower. And then we find another set of letters from a church called St. Mary. And we learn from these letters that on a Sunday morning you would see an altar, a choir, and maybe a great big and beautiful magnolia tree. And that's a particular thing about St. Mary's that you would see. Whoops. And then we get another collection of letters from a church called St. Peter. And we learn that on a Sunday morning at St. Peter, you could expect to see an altar, a choir, and maybe they have a really old and beautiful cemetery on their campus at this church, St. Peter's. And then you find some letters from St.Liz, from our church. And you learn that on a Sunday morning at this church called St.Liz, you would see an altar, you would see a choir, and you would see a butterfly stone. Now, if you go to St.Liz, you know that butterfly stones for us are important because everyone who is baptized at St.Liz, they get a butterfly stone with their name on it, and it's put alongside our sidewalk. Now, what you would notice when you lay all of these different letters together is that, for these kinds of churches in this area of the world, altars and choirs are important for everybody on Sunday morning. All these churches have that. But then you would notice things that are specific to that particular community. So St. Michael's, their bell tower is clearly important to them. St. Mary's, their magnolia tree is clearly a part of who they are. St. Peter's, their cemetery is important to them. And at St. Liz, butterfly stones are important to us. That's a thing about our community that makes us unique. And that would be another avenue of investigation and study. Now, when we do all of that kind of historical work in our little made-up experiment I just did, you can do the same kind of thing, ask the same kinds of questions when you read the Gospels. So if you were to pick up the Gospel of Mark, you would see, that bread is clearly important. There's a character named Peter who is important. And in Mark, there's a lot of intensity around demons, and demons are bad, and Jesus is banishing demons left and right. If you were to pick up the Gospel of Luke, you would see again, Jesus interacts with bread at some particular points. That's important. There's a character named Peter who is worth remembering for some reason. And for Luke, concerns about wealth are really, really important to him. So we have things like the parable of the rich man and Lazarus that we get in Luke. If you were to pick up St. Matthew's Gospel, again, you would see, bread is of significance here. There's a character named Peter who is important. And for whatever reason, in St. Matthew, it's important that Jesus does a lot of teaching, for example. That's a thing about Matthew that we would need to notice. And then when you pick up St. John, John's Gospel, again, you see bread being used at particular points, although not exactly the same way as the other Gospels. You will see Peter will appear at different points, and again, whoever this figure of Peter is worth remembering. And then you will see a word that you don't see anywhere else, this phrase, put out of the synagogue. And you would say, I wonder what's going on in John's Gospel, in John's community, that this phrase, put out of the synagogue, that we don't see in any other Gospel or any other book of the New Testament. Why might that be important? And we could ask other questions. Now, the reason that this sort of particular kind of stuff matters is that, again, we saw in John 9:22 that there's conflict between some community around Jesus and some group that John is calling the Jews. So chapter 9, verse 22. But the man's parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Now, if we're not careful, we start reading that and we say, the Jews are the bad guys in John's Gospel. And that's as much reflection as we do on that. However, if we pay attention to these particular little unique things that are going on for John's community concerns like being put out of the synagogue, we have to nuance our understanding of what John means by portraying a conflict between the community around Jesus and some group called the Jews. If John's community is concerned about being put out of the synagogue, then it's reasonable to assume that John's community is a group of people who value being part of the synagogue. I mean, you wouldn't be afraid of getting kicked out if you didn't value your place there. And if it's true that John's community values their place within the synagogue, then it would follow that we can't simply read John's gospel as about some conflict between Jesus and the good guys and this group called the Jews. Instead, we have to read John's gospel. One of the things going on there is that there's a group of people, all of whom love the synagogue, all of whom value their Jewishness in some way, who are in a real and acute kind of conflict right now. Otherwise, John wouldn't care about people being put out of the synagogue. That wouldn't concern him. So that's just a little bit of a Bible study about one little piece of the gospel we had this past Sunday. Again, doing these kinds of, even though it feels kind of pedantic, doing these kind of particular little word studies, they can give us, they can create some possibilities for reading and understanding what's going on, particularly in passages that might feel problematic for us for good reason. And they can help nuance that and give us some new ways of understanding what's going on that might bring us the historical reality of the authors of the Bible in a way that we might not other get to. Anyway, that's what I've got for us this evening. Love y'all very much, and I will have worship videos up Sunday morning by 8:45 again. All right, say your prayers, wash your hands, and God's peace be with you.